Today is Tuesday, June 20th. We are talking about two storm systems, both considered rare for this time of year, and an urgent search to find a tour group that disappeared on its way to the Titanic shipwreck site. Plus, how some companies are marking World Refugee Day. Researchers tested a common theory about heavy drinking and how much it costs for the newest tickets to space. Those stories and much more news to know in today's episode. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. The Deep South is now cleaning up from a tornado outbreak, just as Puerto Rico prepares for a possible hurricane. First, let's talk about the tornadoes. They broke out in Mississippi yesterday morning, killing at least one person and destroying several homes. That outbreak was just the latest in a series over the holiday weekend that overall left 6 people dead and hurt about 100 others. Storms also knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses that are now left without AC in extreme heat. Utility providers are starting to make some progress getting the electricity turned back on, though. But even more storms are possible today, and millions of people are still under an excessive heat warning, mostly in Texas. Separately, meteorologists are keeping a close eye on the tropical storm Brett. It's expected to turn into the first hurricane of the season in the next couple of days. It formed off the west coast of Africa and is now tracking toward Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Though exactly what happens next is tough to predict at this point. And the federal agency NOAA is predicting a near-normal hurricane season this year. Well, there is now a big rescue operation underway deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. A tourist vessel was carrying 5 people to the site of the iconic Titanic shipwreck. And now it's missing. It lost contact less than 2 hours into its dive on Sunday and never made it back to the dry land. So now American and Canadian rescue teams are searching around the clock on the surface of the water, underwater, and from the air. Though it's not easy, since the vessel is thought to have disappeared 900 miles off the coast in a portion of the ocean with a depth of about 13,000 feet. Reports say the group only had enough oxygen and fuel to survive for 4 days, or maybe less. So this is an extremely urgent search, especially since even if rescuers do find the vessel, it might still be complicated to carry out the rescue mission. One marine engineering expert told the AP, if the vessel made it down to the ocean floor, options are limited because there are few other vessels that can get that deep, and divers certainly cannot. The vessel is operated by a company called Ocean Gate Expeditions that sells trips to tourists for at least $250,000 each. This was actually the company's 3rd voyage to the Titanic. In fact, a journalist went on the trip last year for a segment on CBS Sunday Morning. Well, he was supposed to at least. His trip got canceled shortly after it began. And in that report, he noted some of the equipment seemed, quote, jerry-rigged. More missions have followed since, though, and OceanGate says just last year, 28 people were able to see the site of the Titanic, which sank more than a century ago and has been a source of fascination ever since. Remember earlier this month how a dam in Ukraine collapsed, unleashing huge floods on both Ukrainian and Russian-controlled areas of the country? Well, now an international team of legal experts investigating says it's highly likely the collapse was caused by explosives planted by Russians, though Russia is still accusing the Ukrainians of sabotage. The United Nations says it wants to help people in the area who are in desperate need of drinking water, food, electricity, and more. But Russia is not allowing the UN into flooded areas. The Russians blame security concerns since fighting in the war makes it unsafe. But the UN says the Russians aren't holding up their international obligations. And one expert told Sky News the Russians likely just don't want outside eyes on the area. Meanwhile, heavy fighting does continue, especially in southern and eastern Ukraine. America's top diplomat wrapped up a rare visit to China this week with some new promises. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Chinese President Xi Jinping yesterday after a series of meetings with other high-level Chinese government officials. In those meetings, the U.S. and China agreed to set up a group dedicated to restricting opioids, and China promised not to supply lethal aid to Russia to use in Ukraine. But more than anything, the two sides say they stopped their relationship from continuing on a downward spiral. And China's foreign minister promised to visit Washington, D.C. later this year. The two sides didn't exactly agree on everything, though. In fact, they're still far apart on the biggest issues like Taiwan, trade, and human rights. Now, Blinken says that's something the U.S. is just going to keep working on. He's hoping for more breakthroughs soon. To be continued. Today, the world is marking World Refugee Day, and it's especially important this year since the number of refugees worldwide has doubled in the last decade. The United Nations says there's now nearly 35 million refugees around the world, and that doesn't even count the tens of millions more who have been forcibly displaced but not granted refugee status. So the UN says today is the day to celebrate their strength and courage and offer support however we can. Many multinational companies say they're doing just that by offering refugees jobs. More than 40 corporations like Amazon, Marriott, Starbucks, and Hilton say they will hire, connect to work, or train a total of 250,000 refugees. Nearly 14,000 will get jobs directly in those companies. All right, we have much more news for you still ahead. But first, let's take a quick break for our sponsor, ZocDoc. If you've been thinking about a health problem you have, I want you to know that thousands of medical professionals are out there to help, either to give you some peace of mind that everything's okay, or to get you the treatment you deserve. And ZocDoc helps you find the right doctors for you, the kind that both take your insurance and listen like a friend while giving you the expert advice that you need. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. No more wasting time calling around various doctors' offices only to find out they don't take your insurance or they can't get you in for another 6 months. ZocDoc is set up to help you find quality doctors and avoid all the surprises or unexpected issues. Go to ZocDoc.com/newsworthy and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc, ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. Okay, now back to the news. Well, it turns out people who are heavy drinkers might not actually hold their liquor as well as they might think. Researchers at the University of Chicago looked into the idea that people become more tolerant to alcohol if they drink heavily or often. And they found the idea that some people can drink more and remain functional after time is just a myth. They looked at 3 groups of people, mostly in their 20s, those who are light drinkers, those who are heavy social drinkers, and those with alcohol use disorder or alcoholism. People in the study were given drinks and then tested, but they didn't know whether they were getting drinks with alcohol or not. Well, after having a few drinks with alcohol, people who are heavy drinkers and those with alcohol use disorder reported feeling less impaired than the light drinkers. But the thing is, when they were given tasks to test their cognitive ability and fine motor skills, they did just as poorly as those in the light drinker group. So one of the study's authors says this is just something experienced drinkers need to keep in mind, that just because you're used to being impaired, it doesn't mean you're not. The FAA is now looking into how a United jet crashed into a Delta plane on a tarmac at Boston Logan International Airport. It was a very slow motion collision, so thankfully no one was hurt, even though both planes were full of passengers. People on board actually took video of what happened. You can see them reacting in disbelief as the United plane gets closer and closer to the Delta one, then hit. The plane got towed back to the gate and everyone was delayed until the same passengers, pilots, and flight crew could get on a new plane. The incident raised some concerns since it followed a series of near collisions at U.S. airports. And just earlier this year, the FAA published a call to action, asking airlines to be more vigilant and review things like checklist procedures and runway safety information. Just last month, the agency awarded 12 airports more than $100 million for upgrades meant to prevent problems like this, like building new taxiways. Boston's airport, though, was not one of them. This week, Airbus landed the biggest ever aircraft order in the history of commercial aviation. India's largest airline, Indigo, put the order in for 500 planes from the European aerospace giant Airbus. As Reuters reports, the deal is worth billions of dollars, though the number of aircraft is what really makes this stand out. Airbus executives say it's about making affordable air travel accessible to millions more people in the world's fastest-growing market. India just recently surpassed China as the most populous country in the world. And before this order, the biggest commercial aviation deal in history happened just a few months ago when Air India bought 470 new jets. India's government also says it plans to pour $12 billion into the country's airports over the next couple of years. Virgin Galactic has now set the dates and prices for its commercial flights to space. The company set its first launch window for a flight next week. It'll be sometime between Tuesday and Friday, just depending on the weather. Then its second commercial space flight will happen in early August. Virgin Galactic says it plans to operate monthly space flights from then on. And already it's sold more than 800 tickets. Those tickets don't come cheap, though. They cost $450,000 a person. And the whole trip doesn't actually last that long. Passengers will travel 55 miles above the Earth's surface on a carrier plane. Then a space plane will use its own rockets to actually go into orbit at 3 times the speed of sound. Once they're in space, passengers will get to unbuckle and experience weightlessness and take in the views of Earth for a few minutes before coming back down to the planet. Eventually, Virgin Galactic says it plans to launch 400 flights a year. Well, that's it for the main news today, so now it's time for Trivia Tuesday, when we ask a different trivia question every week. But first, thanks to our sponsor, AG1, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it every day now because I now feel more sustained energy throughout my day since starting it. I can also tell it supports gut health, and I appreciate that it's supporting my immune system too. We're talking 75 high-quality vitamins, probiotics, and whole food-sourced ingredients. I drink AG1 as part of my morning routine before I really get going and start my day. It's easy to put in a to-go cup while I have to run around with my toddler or make breakfast for him, and it makes me feel like I'm also doing something for myself and for my body. It's so easy to make with 1 scoop mixed with ice water. I personally like a splash of lemon, and in that moment, I have started the day on the right foot. And yes, I have tried a bunch of different supplements, but I love that AG1 is one solution to support whole body health. So if you are looking for a similar effective investment for your health, try AG1 and get 5 free AG1 travel packs and a free 1-year supply of vitamin D with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/newsworthy. That's drinkag1.com/newsworthy. Check it out. Okay, now back to Trivia Tuesday. Today's trivia question is, which American states grow coffee? You can play along with us in our weekly roundup email that comes out each Friday. Simply sign up to get it at thenewsworthy.com/email or find the link in today's episode notes. As for last week's trivia question, who was the world's first billionaire? The answer is John D. Rockefeller. He was the top oil tycoon of the 19th century. His Standard Oil Company actually controlled 90% of American oil refineries by the late 1880s, before lawmakers started passing antitrust laws forcing his company to break up. Then, when Henry Ford rolled out the Model T in 1908, the oil industry really boomed. Rockefeller brought in thousands of dollars a day, and he officially reached billionaire status in 1916 after he retired. Though even then, he apparently avoided buying anything too extravagant. And toward the end of his life, Rockefeller gave most of his money and assets away to his heirs and to various charities. All right, thank you so much for listening today and for helping to spread the word about us. We'll be back with much more news to know tomorrow. For now, have a great day.